Hey friends of TAD, my name is Andrea Renee. I am a coach, a facilitator, and I'm also the creator of a program called Coaching as Activism. It's a 10-week program that supports people that are coaches, healers, transformative leaders to bring a social justice or anti-oppressive lens onto their work and their life. So TAD sent me a few questions to answer about the program and the story behind it, and I'm about to answer them. So there are many stories behind the creation of Coaching as Activism. There's a story of me growing up with a dad that's a coach and growing up reading a bunch of personal growth self-help books that were specifically meant for teens and all of that fun stuff. There's also the story of me feeling so deeply connected to so many of the tragic things that have happened in our current reality and in our history, and always being consumed by whatever was the hot topic at that moment in my life, whether it be human trafficking or slavery or poverty. There are so many things that I have dug into and gone really deep into in an attempt to just understand why. There's also the story of the blog post that I wrote that's called Why the Self-Help Industry Isn't Changing the World. I wrote that back in June of 2016, and this program was kind of born out of that because there was so much interest, so many people saying, oh my God, I've been feeling something similar, I've been having similar thoughts, and you name them for me, or like just a lot of like, wow, yes, which is really, which kind of took me aback. But there's that story. There's also just the desire and the want to see more coaches, healers, spiritual teachers, and whatnot that have platforms, have influence, are doing all of this beautiful work with people, with individuals and groups, wanting to see them have more understanding of reality. And so when I say reality, I'm talking about the real barriers that people that are brown and black, people that are disabled, people that are trans, non-binary, people that are undocumented in the US, people that are have some sexual orientation other than heterosexual, people that are fat. The ways that these social identities impact the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see each other, the way that that influences our experience in this world. Really wanting to see coaches and other transformative leaders have some awareness around that, have some awareness and do some deeper work with the people that they serve. So there's a lot of different ways to understand and approach coaching. For me, I see it as a tool that can be used to support people, whether it's individuals or groups, to understand in a deeper way who they are, what they want, what's in the way of what they want, and how to make moves toward their desired goal or vision. Coming into Coaching as Activism, I am defining activism as actively dismantling that which doesn't serve us collectively, and also actively creating and cultivating systems and cultures that are more just and more humanizing. So I think, like in popular culture, when you see activism, it often looks like protests and direct actions, organizing communities out in the streets, being on the front lines, and that's all super valid, super valid and needed and necessary. And the forms of activism that happen kind of like under the radar or aren't as visible are also really valid. I think that activism can happen in every moment and in every interaction that we have with each other. It can happen through parenting, through art making, through writing, through teaching, through the way that we love each other, through the way that we spend our money, and also just generally how we choose to show up to our lives. Defining healing is difficult, but I'll tell you what I think of when I think of, okay, how do you define healing? The etymology of the word heal is whole or to make whole. And so when I think of the definition of healing, I think of remembering that we are whole, or tending to the places in ourselves or in each other that have been harmed or forgotten in some way, in whatever context. So, defining justice and liberation is also one of those hard things to do. I think that there are so many different visions of what justice looks like and what liberation looks like. I wrote a little poem kind of thing in my book of poetry called Love Manifesting, and I'm going to share that with you as my answer to this question. If the vision is of a world where each being is free to be and become, and oppression is an experience of endured dehumanization and devaluation, systemically embedded within our cultures, institutions, communities, families, and our psyches, and injustice is any action or collection of actions, systems, that devalue or dehumanize being, then justice is the active affirmation of being by way of actions or collections of actions, systems. And liberation is gaining the freedom to be and become. Love manifested. The most common understanding around coaching is that it's neutral. And I agree because coaching is a tool. But where this comes in and why this matters so much is that the person using the tool is not neutral, and the person experiencing the tool is not neutral either. And so when we acknowledge that and then just take a look at our current state within this industry, within spiritual coaching, in any form of like healing or, what you see in the larger scope of things is mostly white people, mostly cisgender people, mostly able-bodied people, mostly middle class, upper class people, mostly Americans. And all of these things affect the way that you use that tool of coaching, especially if you're going to be using it for all people, because all people do not have the same experiences as the white, cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual person. And that's why this is important, because there's so much opportunity missed when we don't have the context around what this interaction is between me and this other person, where the power dynamics are, what are our identities. And so when I think about and work to see coaching as activism, there are so many ways in which we can bring our values of equality, justice, just generally wanting to make the world a better place into our work. There are so many issues that are dearest to my heart. I think overall, my focus is on systems of oppression and systems of dehumanization, systems of control, and how those show up in our everyday lives. So I am focused, obviously, on like the ones that affect me most. Things like white supremacy, racism, fat phobia, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, things like that. Those are definitely the things that I know the most about and am most closely tied to because they deeply affect my experience of life. But I also recognize that my liberation is deeply tied to the liberation of people that have disabilities, the liberation of people that are undocumented, the liberation of people that don't have the class privilege that I have. So, I want to see Black women thrive. I want to see Black children thrive. I want to see Indigenous people thrive. I want to see disabled people be able to thrive. And currently in the society, there are so many things that are preventing the ability and opportunity for people with marginalized identities to thrive, to truly live out the lives that they wish to live out. Okay, 3 tips. I'm gonna have to use my notes for this one so that I can remember. So 1 is to take a look at how you're showing up in your work. Are you actively doing the work to unlearn and heal the ways in which things like racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression show up in your everyday life, in the way that you think about yourself and in the way you think about the world? So take a look at that. And then 2, take the whole person into account when you're working with them. There's an assumption within, especially, and this is a very white assumption, that when you're working with someone, if a white person's coaching a Black person, that they have the same opportunity that you have, if you're white. And that's just not true. So taking the whole person, the whole context of the world that this person lives in into account when you're approaching a coaching conversation with them. And 3, using your platform and your influence to educate or bring awareness to various issues, whether it's a natural disaster or a tragic, unjust event. But bringing awareness to, and it doesn't even have to be surrounded around an event, but just like the current experience of huge groups of people in our world, bringing awareness to those things in your communities, that is huge, and you have the power to do it. I can't think of 3 pitfalls right now, but I do have one that I think is very, very, very important. Don't get caught up in trying to make it perfect. As you're working to make your work your activism, whether it looks like maybe you want to do it without getting into any conflict, maybe you want to be nice all the time, or maybe you never want to get called out, or maybe you don't want to hurt anybody along the way. Those are all, I think, those all like testaments, you know, to the fact that you care, the fact that you care about how you're affecting people, and that's beautiful. But definitely don't let that taint or get in the way of you doing the work, because making mistakes, accidentally hurting people, unintentionally hurting people, getting called out, that is a part of the work and it cannot be avoided. So I think the thing that you might want to avoid is trying to avoid things. You know, I think that most coaches don't use their coaching as activism because they don't realize that it's an option, um, and they don't, or they think that's what they're doing. Um, I think that so much of this industry is focused on creating a ripple effect, and that can give people reason to be really complacent when it comes to social issues. To say, yes, I know there is suffering happening out there, but I'm going to do my work and I'm going to let that just kind of flow out. I'm going to send love and light that way. Yes. And their change needs to happen on multiple levels, on an individual level, on a cultural level, institutional, systemic. It needs to happen in so many different places that is not just contained within the individual. So I think that most coaches are taught this way of being. You know, we're taught not to to not focus on those issues out there, and to focus in here, because this is where we have control. This is where we have the power to change things, right? And this is what's taught in training programs and whatnot. To there's not many coaching training programs that teach coaches how to have some cultural competency around their work. So I think it makes sense that the current state of this industry would look the way that it does, and exist the way that it does now, when this industry was founded and created, and the foundation of it was born out of the minds of white cisgender men. And that shows, because there's just such a limited perspective when there's only been one voice, whether it's the voice of a white person or the voice of a man or the voice of a cisgender person. There's only been this vacuum of voices happening that does not include the voices of people with other identities. So I think those are some of the reasons that coaches aren't engaging in this way of approaching activism, and approaching their coaching. Thank you for joining me on this journey through my mind and the Coaching as Activism program. If you'd like to find out more, my website is andrearenee.com, and the website for the program is andrearenee.com/invitation.